away to a land where they were not born, where they know nobody, where they are not used to. It is the Maasai's version of the Trail of Tears, if you know what I mean. You know the Trail of Tears? So when I say Tanzanian stories are human stories, nearly 200 years after Andrew Jackson drove out those 5 civilized tribes from southeastern United States to the west of the Mississippi, we are seeing the same thing in Tanzania. These are human stories. But I want to talk about the structures and institutions, the governance structures and institutions and processes that allow these things to happen. I want to talk about our constitutional politics and the way those constitutional politics have allowed abuse of power, corporate abuse of power, and I'll come to that very briefly, very shortly, how our constitutional and legal structures and governance structures have created the conditions that allow corruption to thrive and that allow abuse of power and human rights abuses of the most horrible nature to happen. Now, to start with, in documents made public recently in British courts in London, we now know that Barrick Gold Corporation is one of the top 3 leading gold producers in this world. It's a Canadian multinational mining company based in Toronto. We now know, as a result of the publication of those public documents in English courts, that for years, Barrick Gold was paying the Tanzanian police and intelligence and security apparatus to keep the peace in the company's 3 gold mines in Tanzania. Barrick Gold, according to those documents, was paying was making monthly cash transfers officially to the Tanzanian police force and to the intelligence and security agency to make payments for police officers, paramilitary units, and intelligence officers to keep the communities at bay in the areas around the mines. Now, you would wonder why would a Canadian mining company pay millions of dollars to Tanzanian security forces to keep the peace? What has happened in those areas? In Tanzania's mining fields, Tanzania is Africa's 3rd largest gold producer now. Now, in the process of transforming the country into the 3rd largest producer of gold in Africa involved a state-organized violence against hundreds of thousands of rural people who were living in the lands which are now gold mines owned by Barrick, and tens of thousands of artisanal gold miners who worked those fields before Barrick moved in. So the process of Barrick obtaining the gold reserves that it currently exploits in Tanzania was a very violent one. It involved forcible evictions of perhaps hundreds of thousands of people. My first arrest came on Christmas Eve of 2002, and it was because for 3 years I had led a campaign to expose the human rights abuses associated with those evictions, with Barrick acquiring those areas. So it has been paying millions of dollars to Tanzanian security agencies in order to continue keeping the communities out. When the documents were released a few weeks ago, it made major, it was front page news in one of the leading British newspapers. It was on the Times of London. It was on the Financial Times and so on. It came as a surprise to many. But it did not come as a surprise at all to those of us who had been involved in the fight against this company. It didn't come as a surprise to the thousands, the tens of thousands of communities whose lands were taken away by force to make room for Barrick to build its gold mines. In other words, we have known for years that for Barrick to operate, they have had to pay off a lot of people within the government of Tanzania. They have had to pay a lot of people within our security agencies. So it didn't come as a surprise to us at all. The mere fact that the proceedings that led to the publication of these documents in London, instead of perhaps Dar es Salaam, should tell you something about Tanzania. I spent more than a decade trying to prosecute Barrick in our courts. It didn't work at all. It didn't work at all. I didn't get nowhere. It couldn't get a hearing anywhere in our courts. Couldn't get any sympathy anywhere within our government or the press. And then we realized that maybe we have to find ways of fighting them in courts where there is a possibility of getting a hearing. And that's how we went to Great Britain. So cases that have been filed in the UK have led to the publication of these documents. And there is a lot of stuff that has come out as a result. And perhaps those who could not get justice in Tanzanian courts may get justice in British courts after all. It is because our courts are part of the problem. Our courts are thoroughly corrupt, and they have been corrupted by these big corporate players such as Barrick. Now, I said I want to talk about the constitutional structures, the constitutional and legal structures that allow these things to happen. So I would like to give you some background about our constitutional order, our political and constitutional order. And that, to me, is where the central problem of corruption lies and the central problem of abuse of power and abuse of office. Tanzania has a political system and a constitutional system that resembles somewhat the American political system. We are not a parliamentary democracy. We are a presidentialist democracy. We have an executive presidency like the United States. We don't call ours a Supreme Court, but we have our version of a Supreme Court. It is called the Court of Appeal of Tanzania. It is both an appellate court as well as a court of original jurisdiction. We have parliament. It is not a two-chamber parliament like your Congress. It is a single-chamber parliament. Now, where is the problem? The problem is Tanzania's constitutional order, our constitutional order, is built around the presidency. Our president and our presidency has been described by constitutional scholars as an imperial presidency. An imperial presidency in the sense that the Tanzanian president enjoys the kind of powers, of constitutional powers, that were enjoyed by European monarchs of the time before the 19th century revolutions, the age of revolutions in the 1840s and so on. Our president enjoys absolute powers. Our president is not only a head of state, he or she, now we have a she. Can I have some water? Is there a possibility? Yeah, please. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry. Our president, now it's a she, enjoys the kind of powers that are similar to the powers that 18th century European monarchs enjoyed. Unlimited powers. She's the head of state. She's the chief of government. She's the commander-in-chief of the armed services, of all of our armed services, including prisons and the police force. Our police force is a national police force. As a head of state, the Tanzanian president is also part of parliament. Our constitution is our parliament is divided into two parts. You have the House of Representatives. It is called National Assembly, composed of elected, semi-elected, and unelected members. And the other part is the president. Now, you only find that model in Britain. You only find that model in Imperial Britain. The British king is always a part of British Parliament. Now, our president is part of our parliament. So when we say imperial presidency, in fact, it is literally true. Our president has powers and privileges and prerogatives that are similar to British kings or British monarchs. So she is now, but she is part of parliament. She not only assents to bills that are enacted into laws, she also gets to appoint a certain number of members of parliament. So our parliament, unlike the House of Representatives here or Senate, our National Assembly is made up not only of members elected in constituencies, it also is composed of members who are appointed by the president, 10 of them. As head of state, our president has power not only to summon parliament to sit or to prorogue it. To prorogue is to send it home. Our president has powers to even dissolve the National Assembly. He can dissolve our parliament. I wonder if the President of the United States has powers to dissolve Congress. Ours does. If our parliament passes a law that the president does not like, he can veto it. The parliament has power to override that veto. If the president still doesn't like the law, he has power to send parliament packing. So in terms of the relationship between the presidency and the legislature, the shadow of the president towers over our legislature. There is no check and balances there. The president has more influence, even inside parliament. As chief of government, the president of Tanzania appoints anyone of consequence. He appoints, again, now that she's a lady, she appoints all ministers and their deputies. She appoints all heads of government departments, heads of independent institutions of the government, like public universities. She appoints local, district, and regional administrators. She appoints all judges and other senior judicial officers and administrators. She appoints all members of constitutional commissions, constitutional or statutory commissions, commissions such as the National Electoral Commission. So she gets to appoint the heads and members of the Electoral Commission, the Judicial Service Commission, every commission that you can think of. Its chairpersons and members are appointed by the president and their chief executives. She appoints the clerk of the National Assembly. The clerk of the National Assembly is the chief executive officer of parliament. She appoints all the service chiefs, the armed forces, and commanders of individual units of the armed forces. She appoints the police chiefs and senior police officers. And the Constitution declares that for those public servants who are not directly appointed by the president, they are deemed to be appointed by her and they work on her behalf. So think of a clerk or a cleaner in a courtroom somewhere in rural Tanzania, and she's deemed by our Constitution to be appointed by the president, and she works on behalf of the president. Because the president appoints all judges, you can be sure that our judiciary is not independent at all. She not only appoints judges, she is also the ultimate disciplinary authority over all judicial officers. She is the ultimate disciplinary authority over all public servants in the country. She can hire and fire anybody. She has powers to constitute and to disestablish public offices. She can create ministries and appoint ministers as she wants. It is a complete discretion. So when we speak of imperial presidency, that is what we mean. A presidency of this type is not only powerful, it is also protected against accountability. It is protected against any form of accountability. Our president cannot be charged in court with any crime for anything she or he might do while in office. So the immunity is complete. What is happening now here with Donald Trump is unheard of in Tanzania. In fact, people are shocked that these Americans are prosecuting a former president for actions that he may have done while he was a sitting president. That is unthinkable for a country like Tanzania, because the president enjoys complete immunity from prosecution. And that is why you have a spectacle of a former president, Ben Mkapa. He was our third president. In 2019, a year before he died, he published his memoir in which he explains somewhere about how he and some of his senior advisors connived to steal $100 million from the Bank of Tanzania, from our central bank, in order to provide campaign funds for the ruling party, for his party and its presidential candidate. So President Jakaya Kikwete, our fourth president, was elected, if we have to believe President Mkapa, was elected on stolen money. So think of an American president writing memoirs in which he's saying, well, I was a thief, and he getting away with it. So President Mkapa could get away with it because the immunity against prosecution for former presidents is near total. And we have seen time and again, our presidents, while in office, committing crimes for which, if they were committed by somebody else, they would send that somebody else to prison for many, many years. Stealing has become institutionalized, and it is organized at the very highest levels of our government. It is done fairly openly. And it is done that way because our Constitution has given complete protection to presidents. It is not just immunity against prosecution. Our presidents also have prerogatives that remind you of 18th century European monarchs. Our president can pardon convicted criminals, regardless of whatever crime they may have committed. I know that is an issue here too. Now, the prerogative of mercy, as that thing is called, is a drawback to European monarchies of the type that was led the patriots in this country to fight the British. Prerogative of mercy, so he can pardon prisoners regardless of their crimes. The president can declare war, states of emergency. He has powers to detain citizens without taking them to court. This is an innovation, one of the first innovations of independent Tanganyika, by the way. The British, in spite of the oppressive nature of the British colonial state in Tanganyika and other colonies, they never had detention without trial. That is a post-colonial innovation. So, in brief, the presidential shadow hovers over the nation like, you know, it's horrible. You cannot run away from the evil shadow of the presidency. Our president has near total control of the electoral process. She gets to appoint members of the National Electoral Commission and its chief executive officer, as well as those who declare results in a presidential election, the returning officers in electoral districts. Our law requires local government executives to be returning officers in general elections, and all of these are presidential appointees. So the entire machinery of elections is controlled by the president. The president exercises influence, more influence in constituency demarcation, in what you Americans call redistricting. And you cannot believe the gerrymandering that system has allowed. The president basically has carried out redistricting of the country in ways which defy logic. But it is because he has all these powers. Now, in terms of decision making, you can imagine that kind of power. It is without any restraint. It is without any meaningful checks and balances. And therefore, it creates very fertile breeding ground for very high level corruption. And the stories that we have endured in Tanzania in the past 3 decades prove this. Our second president, the first president, was a very clean man. He created this system, but he was a very clean man. Our second president started to exercise his presidential powers in ways which have become now common, using the constitutional powers that he has for self-enrichment. It has become a pandemic now, and it is done openly. So we have a situation where in the latest installment of this never-ending scandals, we have a situation where the current president, the lady Samia, has just privatized all of Tanzania's ports and harbors and related transport infrastructure to a company, you probably know, we may have heard it. They tried to get some ports here. Dubai Port World. Dubai Port World is a government-owned, a port operator that is owned by the government of Dubai, by the Emirate of Dubai. In a deal signed in October of last year, the president has given all of Tanzania's sea and lake ports to Dubai Port World for a time that is unlimited, for a term that is unlimited. The agreement says that deal will come to an end if one of two things happen. One, if either the individual agreements in respect of each particular port comes to an end, and we have more than 20 sea and lake ports. So if individual agreements concerning any of those 20 plus ports come to an end, then the agreement will come to an end. Or if the activities undertaken under the agreement are completed. Now, an agreement to run ports, to manage ports, to develop ports, when will it come to an end? When will we stop having ports so that they cannot be managed, so that they cannot be improved? You know, so it is unlimited. The term is unlimited. As long as we have ports, we will need to manage them. We will need to improve them. We will need to expand them. And therefore, Dubai Port World will continue to manage our ports. The deal says the agreement cannot be terminated under any circumstances, even if there is a breach of diplomatic relations between Tanzania and Dubai, or if there is any other reason or circumstance, including even if it is contrary to international law. The president signed on it. For once, our president did it personally. The practice has always been they will hide behind their ministers. And this one, Samia's own hand is on the document. It was taken to Parliament and it was passed inside 1 week. No debate. So, and we have seen these kinds of actions. Now, to conclude, therefore, if you want to understand why some countries are so corrupt, I think that it is important to examine the constitutional and institutional arrangements that are in place that allow governments or government officials to get away with these kinds of abuses. if the constitutions and the statutes provide the kind of unlimited powers to government officials the way they do in countries like Tanzania, then where they say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So where there is absolute power, in other words, if we want solutions to problems of corruption, we must address the institutional and structural issues, the institutional, the constitutional schemes that allow them to flourish. That is why in Tanzania for the past 30 years, we have called for constitutional reform in order to create constitutional structures which will enable us to hold our to account their powers in our names. I say these are the stories from Tanzania are human stories. What you see in Tanzania, you will see in many countries on the continent and beyond Africa. So thank you once again thank you for the opportunity. And I will answer thank you. I'll answer your questions if any. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, we're happy to open it up. Of course, I've got a list a mile long of questions, which isn't going to surprise anybody. But what will be a surprise is I'm going to step back for a while, and I'm going to let you drive the conversation for as long as you like.
And I think now you should allow me to sit down.
Yeah, sit for this one. Have at it. Jacob, please.
How aware and then maybe thus divided is the Tanzanian people when it comes to this issue of constitutional issues that come up? Like
how divided we are?
Correct, yeah.
I guess as divided as you can imagine. There are people. A polity like Tanzania will always have those who benefit from the system. You will have always people who, because they benefit, they aid and abet the system. You will have people who, because they benefit, they justify the system. And we have our fair share of those. And there are people who, for a variety of reasons, just don't think that their problems have anything to do with the way the country's governance is organized. People think that they are poor because, God did not, bless them with, it is a very popular saying in Tanzania, God is a giver. Yeah. So you have people stealing money left, right, and center. They're becoming very rich, and there are millions who think that, well, these are blessed by God. Yeah. So the country is not united on the need for constitutional reform, as you I think, expect of any country in circumstances such as this. Yeah. Yes? Yes, please?
I just had a question about you referencing the first president as a clean man and then the second president as focusing on self-enrichment. What is to this change between the
Our first president, as I said, created the system. The constitutional foundations of Tanzania today were laid in, and our presided over that system for 24 years. He left office in 1985. He was always the first to admit that he had enormous powers. I think he once had an interview with the BBC in which he said, look, I have sufficient powers under the constitution and the laws to be a dictator. And many people say he wasn't a dictator. And we say he certainly didn't steal. He was a very simple man. I was joking earlier in the day that he was a son of a chief, and the chiefs tend to be very extravagant. But he was a very simple man. He was like a monk. Yeah. You wouldn't notice any of his children on Tanzanian streets today, while you would almost immediately single out Mwinyi. Mwinyi was our second president. You would immediately single out his children. You would single out the children of Kikwete because they are ministers. The wife is in parliament. Nowadays, after 2 years in office, you would almost immediately single out Samia's son because suddenly he's the go-to person if you want to have things your way. So why is it that this president, who was otherwise very clean, what is this contradiction that you have a very clean president being succeeded by these corrupt successors? I think the answer lies in the power structures that he created. He created a presidency which was totally unaccountable to anyone or any institution. And human beings are human beings. You know, you have few clean ones, and then you have everybody else who may not necessarily be corrupt at the beginning. But once they get into power and they realize how powerful they can be and how rich they can become and get away with it, and they change. So I think the the secret lies in this imperial presidency, in this constitutional scheme that was created in 1962. Yes, I saw that one, and then to you.
Yeah, to follow up on that question, I was just thinking, like, why was the first president given like so much power at the start when making the constitution? Were there any objection to that? That's my first question. And then the second question is, do you see any way out for Tanzania in the future? I mean, you mentioned briefly about constitutional reform, but then given the president with such unchecked and unlimited power, he would definitely not willing to give out that power willingly. So do you see any way out for the country?
I think I'll start with the second.
Okay.
I wouldn't be doing what I do if I wasn't hopeful that we can change. I think I'm optimistic that we'll have a better deal, a much better deal than we have had for many, many years. But I know, I'm not naive, I know that it will be very, very difficult. It will be very, very costly. But the Tanzanian people, as all other peoples, can only put up with this kind of abuses for a time. And in recent years, the calls for reform have grown so much. I believe we will win at the end of the day. We will get a better deal than we have had. With regard to the first, what happened in 1962? Why was the president allowed to have this kind of system? Well, my book tells that story. My book, The Remaining in the Shadows, tells that story in great detail. But briefly, we get independence in 1961 from the British. And the constitutional order that we inherited from the British was one of a Westminster, what is called the Westminster model, a parliamentary democracy. We didn't have a president. We had a prime minister as head of government. Now, as you may know, in a parliamentary democracy, a prime minister is amenable to removal by parliament on a simple motion of no confidence. And prime ministers in parliamentary democracies are easily restrained by parliament. So in the first year of independence, Nyerere, the president, there would be president, there was a prime minister. And he immediately started the campaign to move away from the Westminster model. The argument was, this is a model that we were given by these colonialists. Yeah? This is a model that makes for a very weak government. We need a strong government in order to bring development faster. We need a government that will transform the country. The ideology of developmentalism. Everything was done in the name of development. So we need a strong government in order to quicken the pace of development. The argument was we should run while others are walking, We should catch up with the rest of the world. And to catch up with the rest of the world, we need a strong government. And so that's what happened. Now, the strange thing in the government prepared a white paper on the republic, on what the system was going to be like. So we had a government white paper on Tanganyika Republic. Now in there, it was written, as historians have said, that actually that was Nyerere's handwork. He wrote it himself. It's the argument for a republic. Now in that white paper, the government argued, and the words are very instructive. What was their vision of this president? What type of this president, what type of leader was this president going to be? And it said, for us, and I'm actually quoting, for us, the powers, privileges, and prerogatives of a king or chief are not separated from the authority that he wields. And they will not be differentiated, they will not be different from the powers, privileges, and prerogatives of the president in our republic. So here is Nyerere arguing that the future president was going to be as powerful as those absolute kings and emperors of basically 18th century Europe. So the vision was very clear. The inspiration was not really a republic. The inspiration was absolute monarchies of Europe, or the tribal chiefs. His father was a tribal chief. So that was the vision. That was the vision. But the argument was, we need development, and we need the country to develop faster, and so on. And this is the structure that he created. Of course, after 25 years of being president, we were even more backward than when he found us. But we had no rights. We could not do anything. And, that argument and the model has failed. There was a hand there, and then I'll come to you.
Yes, sir. In your opinion, to what extent do outside forces like 2x4 World that you mentioned have a vested interest in keeping Tanzania corrupt so that they can exploit the country?
They play an oversized role. Running the country's ports is a multi-billion-dollar business. So even if we don't have the documents to prove it, because they don't issue receipts when they bribe our public officials. But my belief is millions of dollars would have changed hands to make the president cede control of our ports. In the 90s, when we liberalized our mineral sector, our mining sector, to create conditions for Barrick Gold and other mining multinationals to take over. And then I told you, I spent years trying to fight Barrick. When I was researching how they got hold of one of those mines, someone from Canada managed to obtain documents from the government of Canada under the Freedom of Information Act. So he obtained a bunch of diplomatic dispatches from Dar es Salaam, between Dar es Salaam and Ottawa, between the Canadian High Commission and the Canadian Foreign Ministry. And in one of those documents, I found a document, a message from the then Canadian High Commissioner to Tanzania, writing home on the day after President Mkapa was sworn in as president. And it starts by saying, our man has been sworn in as president. President Mkapa is known for his links with Canada from the time he served as Tanzania's High Commissioner in Ottawa in the 70s. And then she added, now the Bulyanhulu file will move. The Bulyanhulu file, Bulyanhulu is Barrick's, flagship gold mine in Tanzania. That's where in 1996 they kicked out more than 400,000 people and that file had not moved prior to 1996 because the government of President Mwinyi did not resisted these attempts from Barrick Gold and its affiliates and the pressures from the Canadian High Commission to get rid of the local miners. So Mkapa comes to office in 95. In December of 95, and within days, the Canadian High Commissioner is writing home that our man has been sworn in. Now the Bulyanhulu file will move. And it took 7 months, and the people were gotten rid of, and dozens were killed. So the corporate influence on governmental decision making is right. Yes, yes, and then you, and then you. Yes.
So I was kind of looking through some articles and like interviews that you've done, and you've spoken about a new constitution, really pushing for a new constitution. So to what extent do you think that reform is appropriate for just like different governmental agencies and just the overall like government structure? And to what extent do you think that like there just needs to be a complete new, I guess, like overhaul in some ways? And I guess like a follow-up question, to what extent do you think that, because there have been like different international organizations that have called for the like the current government to allow for like freedom of demonstration and free speech and stuff, and like to what extent do you think that there is merit behind like the government actually allowing people to protest and to say what they want to say? And I guess like, do you foresee there being like pushback?
We started the quest for constitutional reform when we were still a one-party state in the 80s. And in 1991, a presidential commission which had been established to investigate whether we needed to go multi-party or remain as a one-party state, recommended that we become a multi-party state, a recommendation which was immediately accepted by the government. But the second and most important recommendation of that commission was a new constitution. And that constitutional commission argued that the current constitution, it was current in 1991, it is still in place today. So the commission said in 1991 that the current constitution is essentially a one-party constitution. It cannot serve a multi-party democracy. It cannot serve the new conditions of multi-party democracy. And therefore, it has to be completely overhauled to create a more democratic and multi-party constitution. In other words, the commission was arguing for overhaul of the political system, changing the political power map of the Tanzanian state. That the government would not accept, and the powers that be rejected, and they have rejected to this day. So the kind of constitutional reform we are talking about are those that will overhaul our state and the institutions of the state, which will change the balance of power between institutions of the state, the presidency, if we retain it, the legislature, the judiciary, as well as a balance of power between the state and we citizens, because we have been completely disempowered by a constitution that does not give any rights to the citizens to hold their elected officials to account. So it is total overhaul. But of course, I know, and you know, that doesn't come easy. And therefore, it will take a while. It will take reforms. We'll have to go through processes of minimalist reforms, but eventually, I think eventually we'll get a better and more democratic constitutional order, because I cannot imagine us going forward like this in the next 20 years. I frankly don't see it.
Yeah. I'm mindful of the time. If this is an acceptable question, the answer to Jackie's question, could we combine the last two as we're about to get kicked out of the room in a short period?
Okay. There was a hand here. Yes. And
Tyler, and who were the next two that you had already chosen?
Now, yes.
So my question really briefly is, with that corruption at the very top, do you think that affects or inspires abuse of power at lower levels?
Everywhere. We have a system which is, if you allow me, rotten from top to bottom. That system has allowed a situation where you have on the one hand elected officials who are totally powerless, because real power lies with unelected officials. Just as real power does between the president and the parliament lies with the president. The parliament is just a rubber stamp. So all through the system, from top to bottom, you have structures of authoritarianism. You have structures of lack of accountability everywhere, and therefore corruption is top to bottom.
That was actually pretty much my question, but a follow-up on. That was actually my question as well, but a follow-up on that was, you mentioned that a lot of people view like tie religion to the authoritative figures, like imagining that God is blessing them. So if corruption is coming all the way down to that localized level, are they still tying God to like blessing those people, or just the people at the top?
Can you clarify? Are they?
I guess I'm just asking, like, are they, if they're aware of the corruption at the lower levels, that it's not tied to religion, are they still tying corruption at the high levels to religion as well? Or are they just like viewing their like riches of the high level authoritative figures as blessings from God?
I think the common view is, corruption starts at our feet with our local leaders at the lowest levels. You don't get if you need to go to hospital because you had an accident, you need a police letter from the police saying that, well, you were involved in an accident. Otherwise, we won't get treated. Now, how do you get that letter from the police? You got to pay for it. And all and up and down. You go to a clinic, you need to see the doctor, you get to pay. So it is not just tied to the top. It is It is everywhere. If I understood your question correctly.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I could take prerogative, well, never mind. I'm not going to do that. But we do have like 3 more minutes actually, so we're okay. So
yes, I see the hand. Your hand. Yes, and then you.
So, I think you touched on a few points, but I was wondering, being that you've had such a challenging journey throughout, just trying to figure out how to better your country, I was wondering what your future steps are. From what I understand, you want to be presidential candidate, and so I was wondering how, in such a system, do you hope to like overcome all the struggles? Because what you mentioned was that the system really favors one party. So if you become an opposition party, what happens next? Will you be okay, considering that your life has already been targeted?
I'll tell you what happened in the last general election. Well, apart from being tear gassed several times in the course of the 2-month campaign, can you imagine of a leading presidential candidate of the opposition being tear gassed by the police in order to be prevented from addressing a campaign rally? Well, that happened to me a couple of times. Apart from that, we went to the elections, people went to vote. Results of the elections were declared. The president, the sitting president, was declared the winner with some, I think, 12 million votes to 1.9 of mine. So it was a really lopsided, if you believe them. But our electoral law requires the publication of those results on a constituency by constituency basis. So you have to show what the candidates got in every constituency across the country. We are still waiting for those results 3 years after the general election. All right? In other words, there is no proof that the sitting president was ever elected. There are no results. But she's a president. All right? And she's a president because our constitution says if the commission, the electoral commission, declares you the winner, you are the winner. No court proceedings are allowed. No challenge of any kind is allowed. So we have a president who cannot prove that she was elected or she and her predecessor were elected because the votes that they obtained do not exist. So the question you are raising is, so I must be crazy to think of going to the elections again, right? Because those conditions, the conditions that allowed us to have a president who cannot prove that she was elected, the same conditions exist today. And that is a conversation that we are having right now. There is a conversation that I had only 2 nights ago, and I have been talking about this for the past 3 years. How do we go to the next elections under the same conditions? In 2019, we had local elections, and in those local elections, 96% of the opposition candidates were disqualified. 96%. So, at the local level, it is all CCM, it's all the ruling party, because they disqualified everybody. And in the general elections in 2020, in parliamentary elections, they disqualified 28 opposition candidates. And therefore, you have about 12% of members of the National Assembly, members of parliament, who were not elected because their opponents were disbarred from participating in the elections. Serious issues, serious problems. But we have to find answers to. And these are very real practical problems. They're not theoretical at all. How do we go to the elections under these conditions again? Yeah. Yeah?
I'm very sad to say that the next class is going to start in this room quite soon. And so we are out of time. I wish we did have more, but let's thank Mr. Lissu very much for his time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And to keep up our tradition, after a heady discussion on some of the world's more pressing issues, I present to you an umbrella. It's a token of our appreciation, and maybe we'll turn on the news some night. We'll see you at a rainy rally with our Masters of International Business Program umbrella.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on Monday.
Yeah. Was it good? Okay.
Shatra tumemaliza na darasa limekwisha. Asanteni sana kwa kufuatilia. Tutaonana katika Good Morning Africa 11:40, 11:45. Thank you all.
They actually many good days. And the good days are, I go to rallies. I do a lot of meetings, public meetings. And you cannot imagine the amount of the kind of hope, and not just hope, but some people are very upset about the conditions that they are forced to live. And people make change when they are upset. You know, people don't make the kind of change that is needed, you know, with smiles on their faces. They have to, yeah, and you see that a lot. And I think that's a good
Empowering people.
yes. My politics are very local. I always talk about their local stuff. There is constitutional politics, you know.
So a lot about education.
It's a lot about education. A lot about education. Dealing with very pressing practical problems. People are upset, arrested, and they're held in police jails. And if I pay a visit to a local police station, a lot of people get released because they know I'll cause a sting. So those kinds of things. Yeah, those kinds of things.
I feel almost partially complicit when it comes to. I had the incredible pleasure to come actually visit India about 2 years ago. Went to the Ngorongoro crater. Incredibly beautiful up there too. The Serengeti for the Great Migration, and seeing some of the safari camps, working with the Maasai, putting them there. But it's not the same, because I believe that they've still been removed off the lands. And it's that education. What is it from our end that we can really be doing, especially for travelers from some of these other businesses or non-government? Like, what can be done?
If we could find a way of showing people that their tourist dollars are causing murder and mayhem in these places, it will be better.
Because I could see them being built, especially
Listen,
yeah.
In Ngorongoro. Ngorongoro is the most lucrative tourist attraction in the country. Brings in hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And the Maasai, those who you have those wildlife because this Maasai have been there 400 years. They are some of the poorest people in the country. Maasai have been reduced to begging for food in a place which brings in hundreds of millions of dollars revenue annually. It's simply because people don't know.
It's wild to see the resort.
People love the animals. They don't know how their love of this beautiful place is actually funding genocide.
I mean, the difference between the resorts and then even the mud village structures is wild.
We can continue the conversation, but we do have to do it outside the room.
Okay.
Because you don't want to see Professor Pimentel angry.
Oh, you don't.
It's not.
So you're ready frying them?
10 minutes. Exactly, the first 10 minutes. It was fresh and popping.
I see.
Yeah.
So these guys all knew about it. They just read it.
Let's take it to the hallway.
Yeah.